Dear, oh dear, oh dear, Rishi Sunak. Not looking good, is it, buddy boy? Just thought I'd do a little semi-regular check-up on the Prime Minister, see how he's going. I'm a compassionate sort of guy. I like to see how things are going with the top dog. I know he's under a lot of stress. It must be tough competing with the last 4 Prime Ministers on who is the worst Prime Minister of all time. It does take its toll, I can only imagine. Now, let's start with some good news, shall we? I know some of you thinking, oh, what are you talking about? Good news for this lot? You'll be looking for quite a while. Well, I always like to start with a bit of cheer. That's the sort of guy I am. And the good news for Mr. Sunak is the Tories have surged in the polls, according to YouGov. The Labour lead's fallen by 7 points. Ouch. Yeah, I mean, I guess panic bells must be ringing for the opposition. Not quite sure that works. But it's true, 7 points. I mean, if we're going to get all technical about details and facts, that leaves Labour with an 18-point lead and a majority of 240 seats. That's Labour on 43%, the Tories on 25%. Okay, so real talk here. The problem for the Conservatives is occasionally they do get this kind of narrowing from a catastrophically low base, but then something happens, like Boris Johnson appears, or some video is conjured up of the Conservatives doing the charge during the pandemic and lockdown. The polling average has Labour with a 19-point lead over the Conservatives, which I think we'd all agree is not good, given the election's about a year away, maybe. It's not looking good for them, is it? Boo-hoo-hoo. It's sad. It's really sad. So at the start of the year, Rishi Sunak made 5 pledges. So the first was halving inflation, of course. How's that going? You've probably noticed in the supermarkets, haven't you? Things have really calmed down. I bet you those wages of yours, you're like, I've got too much real income on me, for me and my family. We're actually on 8.7% according to the latest figures. Now, I realise the Bank of England has decided to try and engineer a recession, supposedly to bring down inflation, as though people spending too much is the problem. You may already know. I do say it a lot. We've gone through the longest squeeze in wages now since the early 19th century. That isn't the reason we have inflation. It is a nonsense. The big issue at the moment is corporate profiteering. Now, the OECD, which kind of bring together the kind of major industrialised nations, or whatever you want to call them, and look at kind of key indicators, they looked at whether workers, businesses or governments contributed most to inflation, and they found in the UK it was business most to blame. Last year, Unite published a report which has been vindicated, which showed that company profits were behind nearly 60% of the rise in inflation. Profit margins for the biggest British companies it found was 73% higher than pre-COVID, even though sales had fallen. Now, their findings were ignored or ridiculed at the time, but they've shown to be devastatingly accurate. This is the same trend across Europe, by the way. The trend you've seen, the IMF reported, rising corporate profits account for nearly half the increase in Europe's inflation over the past 2 years, as companies increase prices by more than spiking costs of imported energy. Now, Christine Lagarde, who's the head of the European Central Bank, said corporate profits drove up prices. The Bank of England, though, this is quite striking, has yet to produce a study calculating the influence of corporate behaviour on inflation. This is according to The Guardian, and says it has no plans to embark on a similar study to the one carried out by the ECB, the European Central Bank. Why? Astonishing behaviour by our Bank of England. So we can't actually look at the cause of inflation, even the evidence points to corporate profiteering. I raise this because then the action would actually have to be taken on corporate profits, wouldn't it? And the Conservatives have no interest in doing that because they are essentially the political wing of corporate Britain, though Labour's making a pitch to try and get right-wing businesses on their side with a promise of changing absolutely nothing in exchange. But nonetheless, that's the reality. The Tories are bankrolled by big business. They believe in big business being the best thing in the world, and they have no interest in dealing with profiteering, even though that is what is driving up our prices. So anyway, he's failed on that, and he's failing on it because he's not dealing with the root cause of inflation, which is corporate profiteering. Next pledge: growing the economy. How's that going for them then? So in the last quarter, the economy shrunk by 0.1%. It's going well, isn't it? It's not growth in the sort of technical sense, is it? It's minus 0.1%. You would look at that and think, you know, that's going up. It's not shrinking. That's what happens. It gets worse though. I mean, in the Telegraph, they report that job vacancies have plunged by 24%. With a top recruiter saying, as a consequence, we may well be headed for recession. Next, reducing the national debt. Lol. So the Office for Budget Responsibility projects sharply rising debt. Turns out sucking growth from the economy has consequences. Reducing tax receipts. If you don't have growth, you get lower tax receipts for a start. Not great from a debt perspective, is it, in terms of reducing that level of debt? Next, cutting NHS waiting lists. Oh my. Well, the Health Secretary Maria Caulfield just this month said waiting lists will probably go up before they go down. And this week they hit a record high in England. That's not achieving that goal, is it? In the sort of, if we're going to go, get pernickety about what achieving your goal means. Is it if you say reducing NHS waiting lists and they go up? It's not a resounding success, is it? Finally, stopping the boats. Well, I'm someone who wants this country to take in more refugees. My brother took in Ukrainian refugees. They were given as an exception Ukraine, which wasn't given to others because, Britain takes in far fewer overall refugees than other European countries like Germany, France or Spain. And rich countries overall take in a lot less than poorer countries, even though we have more resources. Obviously, I don't want refugees coming by small boats just because it's not safe. So it's pretty stupid then, wasn't it, for the government to shut down safe and legal routes for the vast majority of the planet, meaning we have fewer asylum seekers than we did at the start of the century, but more coming via this route because the other routes have been shut down. Now, earlier this month, we had the highest number arriving this year. So what happens is the government just bang the bigoted anti-refugee drum, whip people up into a frenzy, and then people can see people coming via boats. If they wanted a different approach, then they would allow people to come in a different way. But they don't want to do that, and so we just get this absolute farce. They're kind of cooked, aren't they, if we're honest? Just looking at all of that. Those are the pledges. That's the polling. I mean, what comes next? An increasing chunk of their own middle-class voters getting clobbered by rising mortgage costs as the impact of rising interest rates filters through. There's other things will go bad from here on in. Look, you might say, well, the polling's now ridiculous. You get a narrowing in favour of the government. There isn't any enthusiasm for Keir Starmer's Labour. He's winning by default because the Conservatives have essentially trashed the country, haven't they? What have they got to show for the last 13 years? It's not like Thatcherism. I hated Thatcherism, obviously. We still live in Thatcher's Britain. But, her and Ed Myers could go, we transformed Britain, we privatised all these things, we reduced taxes on the rich, we smashed the trade unions, we created a free market economy. That's what they did. On their own terms, I think on other terms, inequality, economic growth, living standards, not so good. But in terms of what they set out to achieve on their own terms, what have this lot done? And they can say Brexit. The latest polling shows that there's a very small proportion of the population think that is a good thing. The Tory Brexit deal is not obviously having a positive impact. It's having a terrible impact. What have they got to show? Nothing. Zilch. Zero. It is a catastrophe. But more importantly, a catastrophe for the country. Now, after 13 years of decline, stagnation and ruin, I think people have had enough. I think you all know what I think of Keir Starmer's Labour. I don't think they have the answers for this country. I am looking forward to take them on as an enemy, if you like, rather than this lot. I think it is a case of which opponent would you most like to fight. It is my profound belief that this crew, I think they're looking pretty cooked, aren't they? I think it would take a miracle for them to turn this around. Apparently Rishi Sunak behind the scenes is really, really, really down and just nothing's going right. Why won't... Yeah, well, it's very sad for Rishi Sunak, and can't wait to see his face when he gets battered in a general election. So, anyway, I'll keep you updated. We'll do this semi-regularly, just see how they're doing, shall we? Nice to check in on him. Please like, do subscribe, do support us on patreon.com/OJOs84 and listen to us on the podcast. I'll see you soon.